All right, hello and welcome everybody. Today we've got our review of Terry Pratchett's The Thief of Time. This is what the book looks like with dust jacket. Published in 2001, it is one of the great Sir Terry, was he knighted? I don't know. The great Terry Pratchett's amazing fiction books. This is one of my favorites. I actually picked up this hardcover copy at an old used bookstore in Detroit, I believe. King Books or something like that. It's the gigantic used bookstore in the Detroit area that I went to one time. And this is one of the books I picked up while I was there. Just to give a little background, Terry Pratchett is an author of satirical fantasy. And early on, he was more on the fantasy side with some satirical aspects. Later on, he kind of became a little bit more satirical, and the fantasy setting was still present, but less in the forefront, right? The color of magic and stuff like that. Those books are pretty solid, significant fantasy with a satirical lens. And then some of his later books are more satire using fantasy as kind of a proxy for the present world. The Thief of Time kind of takes place in the middle, where there's a decent amount of both. It's a pretty, it takes place on the Discworld. It's got a lot of silly and satirical references to things, just to kind of list a few of them. We have one of the main characters' name is Lutze, or Lutze, I don't know, L-U-T-Z-E, which is, obviously a play on Lao Tzu, the writer of technically it's the name of the book, and for some reason that's the name of the author, but it's one of the great Chinese philosophical works, ancient philosophical works. And there's a funny thing about Lutze that actually made me wonder, because there's a character in some of the Raymond Feist books named Nacor, who feels a lot like Lutze. And so I checked this, and like the books that Nacor is in came out in like the early 90s, right? And so I'm wondering if Pratchett read Feist and said, "Ooh, this character," because he's kind of got the Eastern monk aesthetic going on. He talks in a lot of riddles. He always has a trick up his sleeve. The tricks thing is something that Nacor does in the Feist books that Lutze also does as well. We have all kinds of other things that Pratchett references. We have Yetis who can save their games. We have, a little bit of a satirical poke at like modern school teaching, trends of like, oh, just let the children run off on their own and they will learn everything that they need, kind of thing. There's some of that. There's bonsai mountains as opposed to like bonsai trees. We have references to James Bond's character Q. We have a reference to like with some humorous references to gentlemen's clubs, and not like gentlemen's clubs, but like the old school gentlemen's clubs where like it was a bunch of old guys in easy chairs with newspapers, right? Like, the respectable version of that. We have a lot of jokes on like martial arts names. We have a reference to like bands that have 4 members and one guy who kind of left. We have even some satirical references to quantum mechanics and like atomic clocks. It's a fun book. This is a great book that I have not read in a long time, and I really should have read it more often. It's not super long. It's about 300 pages. We're looking at decent sized type, so it's not like a 10-day grueling fiasco to read, and it's very light in most cases through most of the book, and so it's a very easy flowing read. It's got a great story with 2 major through lines and a couple of minor through lines. I'd say at least 2 minor through lines. We have a fair smattering of action throughout the book. There's certainly points where the tension is low, and then there's points where the action and tension become much higher. It's got a good pace. It's not just that there's a bunch of action at the very end. There's a little thing here, a little thing here, a little thing here, a little bigger thing here, a little bigger thing here. And it has a very good kind of curve of stakes seem low, stakes seem to start to get a little higher, stakes get higher, stakes plateau, resolution, falling action, resolution, not resolution, but like, what's the word for like, like post-resolution, like stuff happening to wrap things up, and kind of a nice, nice ending that leaves it open to interpretation what's going to happen with some of the characters afterwards. Let's see. There's a lot of fun action as well. Like there's a massive melee that is decided by chocolate. We have an unconventional kind of chapter scene division system where chapters and scenes are simply separated by the word tick for the most part, and then they're not, and there's a reason that they're not. Very clever. We have, if you've read Terry Pratchett, you may be aware of a group of characters called the Auditors. These are characters that want to they want to know everything about the world, and so their way of doing this is to catalog things, and the more things move, the harder they are to catalog. And so one of the things that the Auditors like to do is they like to, unlife the universe, if that makes sense. In this book, the Auditors return with another, goofy plot, and Pratchett came up with a really interesting way to not just make them kind of like a faceless, personality-free, Borg enemy to deal with, but he actually found a way to make them really fun and really funny and really entertaining to read about. And I'm not going to spoil any more of that because I want you to read the book. As usual, there's tons of Pratchett's, trademark, snappy, funny dialogue. A lot of jokes, little sarcasm, but not too much sarcasm. It's never biting, right? Like, except when it wants to be, right? But it's not like it doesn't drone on in that way. There's a lot of good dialogue. There's a lot of funny dialogue. There's a lot of bit characters that show up to make a point, kind of thing. There's a lot of setup payoff going on. It's a really well plotted book, and I really enjoyed just all the different things that are happening and how they come together in a very satisfying way. There's a lot of fun in some of the action scenes. There's this great absurdist chase where basically some of the characters are using like nonsensical signs to throw other people off of their trail. Very funny scenes, some cool illustrations in the book. Absolutely worth looking through. We have some funny references. In the same way that a melee was decided by chocolate, Pratchett, of course, has to bring up the notion of what makes Ankh-Morpork chocolate. And that is one of the best descriptions in any book anywhere. It's just so funny to see, to read how Ankh-Morpork thinks chocolate should be done. There's a lot of great visual language, as usual. There's a point in the book where there's a flock of birds flying up in alarm at something, and one of them gets hit by a stray burst of time, time is like, it's called the Thief of Time. So obviously the time is going to be a major aspect of the story, in more ways than one. And when that flock of birds flies up and one of them gets hit by a burst of time, that is some of the coolest visual language you will see. It's like one of those things where you do a double take and you read it and you're like, wait, what? And you go back and you read it again because it's that good. It's a super fun story. It's really gratifying. One of the other things that people worry about maybe a little bit when reading Pratchett is that they worry that they're going to need a lot of character backstories to get it. There's not a lot of previous book characters that appear in this story. We have Death and Death's granddaughter, and I think that's about it as far as like main characters that are present that got most of their build up in a previous story. I've actually never read. I think it's what's it called? Mort. I haven't read Mort, so I don't know exactly how much development we've gotten of Miss Susan in previous books. I assume there's some, but like you don't need it to read this book. So this is one of those books where if you've never read any Pratchett, you can hop in and you can do it. It's got a lot of that funny, kind of a parody of like old kung fu movie kind of stuff going on. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of goofy, funny, like snippet philosophy. Basically, the character Lu Tzi is a sweeper. He works in this order of history monks as just a person who sweeps the floors, cleans the loos, etc., etc., and yet he's one of like the most heralded heroes of the history monks as well. And so it's got kind of that like I am only the humble sweeper, yada yada yada, and yet there's a lot of just keep a lookout for Rule 1 is what I'll say, because it becomes important throughout the book, and I mean throughout the book. But it's one of those things where you've got this Lutzi character, and he takes on an apprentice, and things kind of get bigger. There's someone who's doing something that might herald the end of the world. They're being plied by the auditors. The auditors are getting into this new situation that's making them into more interesting characters. We got a little bit of Death having a side story here. We've got, what else do we have in side stories? We have the person who's building the thing that might be dangerous for the world. We have a Nanny Og makes an appearance, but again, you don't need to know too much about her. It's mostly explained in the book what you need to know. All in all, I'll say that The Thief of Time is a really fun read. I'm making this one deliberately short because I don't want to spoil anything. I feel like I've already spoiled too much, almost. But I wrote notes because I'm trying to choose my words carefully, because I really don't want to be like, oh, this happens and then this happens, so bear with me. But yeah, it's one of those great books that builds on the lore of the Discworld. It's not too abstractly fantasy, and it's not too heavily satirical either. It's kind of right in the sweet spot where you get a solid fantasy story with some solid plot and character chops going throughout the story, and yet also you have a decent amount of this satire stuff that just kind of makes you smile throughout the book. You always find Pratchett making some clever play on words, or some clever turn of phrase, or some clever reference to something that you would not ever have imagined that he would have made. I really liked the Game-Saving Yeti because I forgot completely about the Game-Saving Yeti earlier in the book, and it's one of those things that is like a build-up payoff that you almost don't expect. It's really well handled. The reference to James Bond's Q is hilarious. It's very James Bond parody. It's just, but with a history monk. What do you call it? With a history monk flavor to it instead of an international spy flair. There's a lot of fun stuff happening in this book, and if you like fantasy, if you like humorous fantasy, if you like any Pratchett whatsoever and you have not read Thief of Time, I highly recommend it. If you haven't read any Pratchett and you want to give Pratchett a try, Thief of Time is a great place to start, because it's neither kind of in Pratchett's really early days where things were a little bit darker and a little bit more gritty. This is kind of right in the middle where he's not going full this is a satire of the Postal Service kind of thing, which is good. I'm not saying that those books are bad, but also they're also a different niche, right? This is one of those books that's right smack dab in the middle, and it will satisfy people who like fantasy, and it'll satisfy people who like satire together. And if you ever liked any of those old kung fu TV shows or kung fu movies, you will love this book, because it will it makes a bunch of fun references here and there. There's always something different happening that's kind of referencing one of these things. Where Lutzi gets all of his little aphorisms is something that is a absolute delight, and I will leave that unspoiled for you guys. But yeah, this is a good book. Again, if you like fantasy, if you like comedy, either one of those, you'll like this book. If you like Pratchett, you'll like this book. If you haven't read any Pratchett ever, this is a fine place to start. It doesn't rely too much on the past books, but it does a little bit, and so it'll give you that little taste that'll make you want to go back and read some of the earlier Pratchett as well, which also I do recommend it also. Reaper Man is another one of my favorites. So yeah, keep an eye out for that description of what makes Ankh-Morpork chocolate. If you know what if you know the reputation that Ankh-Morpork has, and you know that I'm talking about specifically Ankh-Morpork chocolate, you'll enjoy it. Yeah, so that is my review of Thief of Time. I went a little light on the details here because I really don't want to spoil things for you guys. I really want people to go read this book. I'll have a link in the description. It's not an affiliate link or anything like that. It's just a regular link. And I would be delighted if you would check out some Pratchett because I recommended Pratchett. It's a good book. What else to say? I don't know. If I decided to do a review of The Thief of Time on Election Day, that was entirely subconscious. So, yeah, we'll call it here for today. Tomorrow, I have something that I think you guys will really like. And that is, I'm going to talk about sources for learning Japanese. It's one of those things where people will focus on their favorite media for learning Japanese, and I'm going to explain why you want to do that why it's okay to do that, but that you want to do it in moderation. I've got some fun reasons to do that, or rather to not do that. And what you should be getting out of anime and manga and video games vis-a-vis learning Japanese, and what you should be getting from elsewhere, as well as some ideas on where to get things to study in Japanese. So that's kind of going to be tomorrow. I don't have a good title for it, but it's going to be about Japanese, and it's going to be about where to get study materials. That you will both find useful and enjoy, and how to make your own study materials if you need to, and if you're going to study this language on your own without a professor or something like that, then you probably will need to make your own study materials at some point, because a lot of the stuff that you're going to find is going to be helpful, but might leave you with holes in what you know. So, Thief of Time, fantastic book. Tomorrow, Japanese, have a good day, and I will see you tomorrow for some Japanese study fun. Thanks again. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you like what I'm doing here, if you want to support the channel, you know what to do. If you really want to support the channel, you can go check out some of my fiction and see if any of that happens to be up your alley. Have a good day, and I will see you tomorrow.